All right, we're here. It's Thursday, March 20th. I'm Geoff Schwartz. That is Matt Ford. This is Geoff Schwartz is Smarter Than You, where we talk about football and other things, mostly football, maybe. But right now, Matt, it is March Madness. We have three games going right now. I don't know if you're watching them as we talk. I am. I have wagers. I'm doing well in one. I'm doing okay in the other one, and probably not good in the third game, Matt. I know we were talking earlier today about brackets. You came with a great podcast idea, though. We should do this next year for real. Is like I watch a lot of college basketball post Super Bowl, but I'm not like as dialed in as most are. You, I think, only follow Maryland, but we want to participate in these bracket pools. And of course, 15 minutes before they're due, you go online and you try to just fill them out, and you want to win money, of course, right? I mean,
Yeah.
most of them are for money. And your idea was there needs to be a podcast for just casuals that just goes over every game and gives you a pick.
Yeah. And like in the years past, those have happened. But yeah, this year I felt like I was listening to every podcast on my way into work, my way home from work for like the last 2 days. And all of them are these like, well, like if this happens and this happens, like I just never, it was all these like macro storylines and never just like, hey, who's gonna win the Purdue game? Like just give me the answer. Like I don't need to know like all this highfalutin stats. Just tell me like what's a good pick and a dumb pick.
I would have told you Purdue. I would have told
Yeah,
you
I would
Purdue.
have. Yeah, I wouldn't have needed your help on Purdue. I
Yeah,
don't think.
I would have picked Creighton, who is now up 15 on Louisville, and I probably would have picked Wisconsin against Montana. I mean, no surprise there, obviously, but
Yeah, but
um,
everyone loved
yeah,
Louisville because this game. The only thing I knew about this game was it's in Lexington.
it's in
That's the only
Lexington,
thing
yeah.
I knew about it. And I was like, well, it's a home game. That's an easy one. And they're down by 1,000 in the first 10 minutes.
And then
Awesome.
cool, cause, yeah, because Creighton hit 1,000 threes. I mean, college basketball. Here's my college basketball take. It actually, I think, is an unwatchable sport if not for the final 5 minutes of games.
Huh.
Like
Yeah.
like if the games weren't hectic to end, we wouldn't watch college basketball. It's not a well played sport. I mean, it's a lot of teams just shoot a ton of threes now. Um, and there are like four teams that can play defense and make shots. That's it. But because these games, Matt, the last 5 minutes are a wreck. None of these teams know how to finish. They do dumb things. They miss a bunch of shots. They choke's the wrong word because they're college, they're young players. But like if the last 5 minutes of these games wasn't wild and crazy, I think none of us would like to watch the sport. Is that a
I,
wild take?
no, I don't think so. I think what
Yeah,
bothers me about it now is I used to be a huge college basketball fan,
right.
and it's just turned into like bad NBA in a lot of ways. Like it's just
Yes, that's
like
what it
it's
exactly.
like
That's what
oh,
it
we're
is.
sitting in the
Correct.
corner, we're missing our threes, we're hitting 28% of our threes instead of 35% of our threes, and it's just like okay, but I don't know. It was nice. I was watching, anyone watching this right now, bless you. Thank you for watching. There's the most enjoyable sporting event of all time to watch at the same time. So those of you watching live on YouTube and X, we appreciate you. But I don't know. When I was watching earlier, like I did see somebody pull up from a mid range and like try like one of those like off balance shots, and I was like, I watch the NBA like I don't know a couple nights a week. You don't see that
Yeah.
anymore. Like you honestly
Well,
just
no.
like don't see it ever,
The,
and it was kind of refreshing.
the thing about basketball is interesting is like I actually don't mind the three or layup mentality, like Alabama, right? Like that's how they play basketball, right? It's three or layup, like that's it, right? And some of the smaller schools do that as well because that's just what they are built. Like they don't have big men, right? So they just have to chuck threes or go to the paint. And like I get it, analytically, taking mid-range jumpers is not smart. But the thing is, though, Matt, at the end of these games in crunch time, you need to make 2 pointers.
Yep.
And
Same with the NBA.
yeah, in the NBA, and that's what it's like in the playoffs when the last 2 minutes of a game, yes, guys can make threes. They often do. But the guys that make those mid-range twos are the ones that win championships. I would build a team to play the regular season though. It's like that I think is like the crutch. And that's what happens at the end of these college games is some of these teams just don't ever focus on the mid-range. And then it's like, oh, I got to make a couple mid-range shots to end the game. And they're just like nowhere close to being in. So, I mean, dude's just missing dunks everywhere. This guy I bet on to go over his point total, like Wisconsin's leading scorer, just, oh, that's a foul. I should have called that. All right. And the officiating stinks, but we can get to that in a little bit. I will wager on women's college basketball too. It's not a
Yeah.
bad sport to
It's
wager
great.
on.
It's a great
Um,
tournament this year.
and And a lot of times the favorites just kick butt. That's part of it as well. I think UConn's favored by 48 and a half, which is the funniest. 48 and a half. Matt, they can win the game 87 to like 35. And you're like, oh, that's yeah, I gotta sweat that one out there. It's crazy. Okay. Nonetheless, let's get to football. Matt, the biggest storyline, I believe, is the Bengals signed both wide receivers, T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, to about $70 million combined, average per year, $10 million more than the next team, which is the Philadelphia Eagles.
Yeah, it was. A lot of people thought it wouldn't happen. I thought the big wide receiver news was that the Commanders just signed Michael Gallup. But we could talk about
Former
T.
Cowboy.
Higgins, T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. I guess they're slightly better.
Redid
Yeah,
Debo's deal. Yeah.
yeah, we did that. There was a lot of talk about whether this would happen. I think there was a lot of talk about whether it was going to be a good deal for the Bengals or a bad deal. If they're sort of notorious, frugalness, to maybe put it politely, would actually be an asset for them here. But they went ahead and did it. It probably actually freed up some space for this year. So there's a lot of talk of maybe this actually does mean Trey Hendrickson will get extended instead of traded. But I don't know. Were you surprised to hear that they were both extended?
No, I wasn't surprised to hear that. What's interesting about this is the talk about the positives of this deal. If you're a Bengals fan, it's like less about the players and more about the Bengals changing their business structure. Because for years they just didn't do this, Matt. They don't sign their own players and they don't give them guaranteed money past a year or two. And so this is the Bengals changing their business model. And I think it's right to draft and then develop and sign players. I absolutely do, except this is more expensive than paying these guys last year. But I come back to this, Matt. Joe Burrow is supposed to be, and I think we all agree, one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL. And he should be able to elevate the team around him, like wide receivers around him, or really elevate those guys that he plays with to a new stratosphere. He's that good. So the question becomes this, Matt, okay? Is it better for the Bengals long term to have let T. Higgins be traded, take those draft picks and the money saved, and use them to build up the defense or get a guard? You know what I mean? Like, in the end, is Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase plus someone else, and then you add in two defensive pieces and two more draft picks? Is that a better roster makeup to win a championship? Or is what they're trying to do now, which is basically we're spending $70 million on two wide receivers. We have Joe Burrow, and we have a very young defense that has to be developed. Like, which option wins more championships? And there's not one way to win a championship. But again, I would argue that Joe Burrow's going to elevate everyone around him. The Bengals just have to, do they have to hit home runs on defense? Like, they have to hit all their draft picks on defense for this to work.
Yeah. And that's one of the things about the Bengals that is worth mentioning is, there's a lot of talk about cap space and draft picks, how much they matter or don't matter. But you look back at these drafts that the Bengals have had, other than those three guys, Burrow, Higgins, and Chase, and the occasional Chase Brown, like in their last couple of years, they don't have a ton to show for in the drafts, right? They have a couple of drafts where, like the 22 draft, they draft Daxton Hill in the first round, Taylor Britt in the second round, and then some guys I've not heard of for the rest of the draft. 23, Miles Murphy, DJ Turner, Jordan Battle, Charlie Jones, Chase Brown in round 5 is a nice pick. Like, the thing that they really have to do, they have to start just hitting their picks. Just like we were talking about with Philly and KC and all these other teams. Like, if you're missing on multiple swings year after year after year on the defensive side, it's not necessarily Lou Anarumo's fault, right? Like, you got to just make some of these picks and land them. And I think on its face, the Higgins thing, you had to extend Chase, right? Chase coming off a career year, a historic year,
Triple crown year, yeah.
Like, you sort of had no other choice there. And with Higgins, it's like, I don't know. I don't think that just because Miami hasn't had success with paying their two receivers means that it can't work. Burrow's way better than Tua. Higgins is one of the 5 best players on your team. Like, go for it, And it also, I think, makes a statement to not only to Joe Burrow, who put the pressure on the Bengals to actually spend some money, but honestly to the rest of the league a little bit and just sort of say like, hey, we're different now. Like we are
Yeah.
going to pay these guys. We do believe we can be a contender. And to be honest, like in the AFC North, it's Baltimore. But like, what is Pittsburgh, right? Like Cleveland's going to be in a funk now for a couple of years because this Watson thing. Like those three guys should theoretically be enough to get you, as
Yeah.
close to the playoffs as you can get with a pretty, with a terrible defense. That happened last year. So they just got to nail their picks. I don't have any issue with this
Yeah.
signing. I actually thought it was smart.
Well, I think it's just too late. They should have done this last year, which would have made more sense financially, right? Um, people will point to the Eagles, right? Devontae Smith, and AJ Brown. They paid Devontae Smith early. It's why he's cheaper, right?
Yeah.
I mean that's a big reason for their success. Um, and it's worked, as we mentioned when the Eagles won the Super Bowl. We went through their roster. It's worked because they've hit super duper home runs in the draft, right? With all the young defensive players, like their defense this season is almost all young guys. Like it's going to be, and it's going to be again this year, right? Then they got rid of Darius Slay and Gardner Johnson, and the reason they did all that is because they have these young guys that they've drafted and hit home runs with, and they spent those draft picks very, very well. So that is something the Bengals again have to do. So it's not just a Bengals thing, right? Like this is what all teams do when they pay their quarterback. It's just wide receiver is. I go back and forth between the premium position or not, Matt, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
Jamar Chase is a premium player.
Yep.
And I think you have to have guys like that. But my point about Burrow is like, I keep hearing, I agree with everyone who says Burrow is fantastic. But that means that they should be able to build without having two high priced wide receivers, right? And you can spend elsewhere and build the team around the quarterback being so good. I mean, it's a Chiefs model, right? Essentially, which again, I'm not saying everyone has to follow the Chiefs model, but that's what they did, right? So Tyreek Hill buy and use a draft pick to draft an all-pro corner. Now they hit on the draft pick, right? So again, I don't want to be talking out two sides of my mouth here because I like the draft and develop part of this. Like I've said this for years, that you have to how you build a team, but we just don't have a lot of evidence of this specific thing working, especially when last year the Bengals defense was so bad with these wide receivers on the roster, right? Like they were that bad with these guys. Are the Bengals better right now than they were to end the season?
Probably not, but they were right there. And,
Absolutely, yeah.
famously, everyone was sort of like, well, the Chiefs don't want to see us in the playoffs. And it's like, everyone would have been fine seeing them in the playoffs because they couldn't play defense. And look, defenses can turn around in a hurry. We see it all the time. Like every couple years, there's one of those teams. Like,
Yeah.
there's a Zach Bond every year. There's somebody like that every year who just pops
Yeah.
up. But the Bengals have to, they've turned things around on sort of the narrative of their team. But
Yeah.
they need to find some guys on defense. Like the assignment's pretty clear.
What they're banking on too, they hired Al Golden, defensive coordinator, who's with the Notre Dame Irish. And he did a great job in Notre Dame, right?
Yeah.
And he was with the Bengals before, and they did develop talent pretty well. I think they're counting on that, right, Matt? They're counting on the development of talent from Al Golden coming as defensive coordinator. So that's, I mean, look, it's about. I think they've spent 8 draft picks in the last 3 years on top three rounds on defense. Like they've tried, right, to make it better. So they just have to do it, right? They just have to develop those guys. So I'm curious to see, obviously, how that goes for them. They do talk a big game though for having like 1-0 though. It's so funny to me, dude. Their fans are like, I'm like, guys, the NFL is a year-to-year league. I had fans. Well, they went to Super Bowl 4 years. Like that was 4 years ago.
Yeah.
It's 4 years ago now. 4 seasons ago, 2021. This is the NFL is not the same anymore. You can't just you roll the same thing back, expect it to be the same next season. So obviously we'll see how it goes. I don't know. I mean, we'll find out pretty quickly if this works or not.
Yeah. Well, speaking of finding out whether it'll work, there's a couple teams in quarterback limbo. We don't have to talk too much about Aaron Rodgers because God, that guy has taken up too much oxygen in the sports media world. But we're at this sort of impasse right now for the Steelers, the Giants, the Browns. Everyone's kind of in a holding pattern, it seems like, until maybe even after the draft. The Vikings said today that Rodgers is not in their plans, that they're going to go with JJ McCarthy,
Yeah.
which isn't a surprise. It's almost more of a surprise that they had to say that. So I don't know. I guess like my question really is, should the Giants just sign Russell Wilson now? Like, should one of these teams just get on the board and take themselves out of there in Rodgers sweepstakes and
Yeah.
just sort of like let the marriage solve itself? Like, I kind of think it's time to just make a move and
Yeah.
get your off season going, right?
Yeah. The Giants and Steelers are kind of in a bad spot,
No
having
kidding.
to wait for Aaron Rodgers, who doesn't. I think Rodgers really was hoping that Minnesota would be the place because look at Minnesota right now, right? Look at the
Yeah.
same team they bring back, but I think better. They've made some adjustments to the offensive line and defensive line. It's a great place to be, but the Vikings smartly said, "No, we're out of the Aaron Rodgers business." Why would they want Aaron for one more year? You drafted McCarthy. You have to play McCarthy. Like you got to
Yeah.
play him, Matt. They don't know what they have in him. They should not have moved off their priors. He hasn't even played yet. Now he lost an entire year. He didn't practice. Like he might be behind. It might take a couple weeks for him to get going. But you drafted him to play, and you have to play him. So I'm not surprised that they're out of the Rodgers business. Like that makes a ton of sense to me. The Steelers, look, I don't I don't think the Steelers want to be the second option for Aaron Rodgers. Like, I don't think they want to wait for Rodgers, but they don't have a choice because what their choice right now is Russell Wilson, go back to Russell Wilson, who they don't like, or play Mason Rudolph, who they just signed again. Like they're in a bad and they're not in a spot to draft a quarterback. The Giants at least at three, at least Matt, will probably end up with a quarterback, whether it's Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders. Like they can trade up. Like there's options to get that guy. There's nothing for the Steelers unless they do the same thing. The one wild card is Kirk Cousins. Okay, if the Falcons are willing to trade him, and the reason I think they've signed him is so they can just or decided not to cut him is they can get some. They wanted some cap relief, right? If you trade for him, the team takes on the money, right? If you cut him, it's all your money. That's the wild card in this whole thing is if the Giants get so desperate, so they call Atlanta and say, "We'll give you draft picks and we'll eat his salary to be in the roster." Like that to me feels like the maybe Matt the one way both those teams get out of the situation. But they're in a bad place. And look, I think Rodgers. What is in it for Rodgers to play for the Steelers or Giants this season? Nothing whatsoever. His legacy is never changing. He is a Hall of Fame quarterback, one of the best to ever play this game. Absolutely true. Do I agree with his political views? No, but that shouldn't matter because people have different political views. It's fine. I mean, I not maybe fine's the wrong word. I disagree with a lot of what he says, but he's allowed to say those things, right, Matt? That's his own platform. He can say what he wants. That doesn't change the fact about how good he is as a quarterback. Nothing's going to change his legacy. He's not winning a Super Bowl in any of those places. So like going to New York or going to Pittsburgh doesn't change his career at all. Maybe he still wants to play because he's got nothing else to do. But I don't know why Rodgers would choose either of these teams either. Like I think both these organizations and Rodgers would be best just not hooking up at all, just going their own direction. And Rodgers starting a podcast with Blue Duck.
Oh, I have a few notes on that proposal. Um, I think I think Aaron Rodgers' legacy is going to end up being kind of a little bit of how Favre's career ended, which was these on again, off again retirements. His like he was an asshole these last couple of years, right? He was an
Yeah.
asshole when he was in Green Bay, forced his way out of there. He had, it wasn't his fault. He got injured, but like after all that, he had a lost season with the Jets and then another bad season with the Jets where he held them hostage for a whole year and they, for whatever reason, capitulated and they were terrible. And I think that's, you know, he was such an unusual personality that, I will remember, of course, his back-to-back late career MVPs, his Super Bowl run, how for a while it felt like he might sort of be on that tier with Brady and Manning, and he's close. But I think the only reason he would go back, I think, is for image repair, and I don't really think he needs. I don't think he thinks
There's
he
no,
needs to do that.
but okay. Let's say he goes to Pittsburgh, okay, and they they go 9-8 like they always do, 10-7, and he doesn't do any McAfee. He just does local, the open locker rooms, and he does his media availabilities. What's going to change about how we feel about him?
Nothing. And by the way, we know he's not capable of a year like that, right? Like
Well, so
that's just not
that's
what
one
he's
thing
going
about
to do.
Pittsburgh too, is like, is Pittsburgh gonna quote unquote let him do those things?
I don't think
Because
so.
Pittsburgh to me is about is about you know the organization, the franchise, and that's not very franchise-ish. Interesting, by the way, quickly about Pittsburgh. Najee Harris signed with the Chargers. He had a quote. Do you see this quote about it was floating on the internet today on Chargers team media talking about his time in Pittsburgh, and he said basically like we didn't really do anything on offense, and he said that um, one of the things that frustrated him was there were no older players on offense
Hmm.
that could help him learn football. And that it was a bunch of young guys and no one really knew football. He's like, we had young guys, young quarterback, like no one was there to teach us football, which is two things. One, indictment on the coordinators, but also two, like you do need veterans. Like you need that leadership. That's why I talked about Joe Tooney going to Chicago, why I loved it. Like you need those guys, right? Like, Laramie Tunsil going to the Commanders. Like you need veterans on your team to teach young guys how to play football in the National Football League. I thought that was very interesting. I not thought about it like that, but it's very true.
Hmm.
Like Pittsburgh was a young offensive roster. And I know Russell Wilson came in and maybe made that an older roster, but before he got there, it was young quarterback, young offensive line, young running back, young wide receivers, youngish tight end. Like all those things were there. And it's very interesting because when you think about, again, roster construction, think about what he said. We need some veterans. Like we need some just guys to show us the way. I never heard a lot of players talk about that in that way. I thought it was fairly interesting.
That is really interesting. And it obviously sort of corresponds to my favorite team and what they did last year and why it worked. It's like Jaden Daniels and Bobby Wagner were hanging out.
Bobby
It's
Wagner,
like that's a really good way to learn, right? Like
yeah.
CJ Stroud, like his running back his rookie year was Devin Singletary. It's like that's a guy
Yeah.
who played in the league a long time, and Robert Woods and Dalton Schultz and Tunsil, obviously. Like maybe that is sort of a key is, just having these high
Yep.
functioning, Zach Ertz, Austin Eckler for Washington last year, like these guys who can just come in and just sort of show you the way.
Yeah.
And I wonder, honestly, like
It's very important.
what did Justin Herbert have? Like that's something that's kind of
Well,
interesting.
he had Keenan Allen,
Yeah,
and
who's by his own
when,
account isn't like the most vocal guy.
when he
You know
got
what
to,
I
I'm
mean?
thinking about when he got to who was his offensive line? Was not an older group, was it?
And they sort of
Yeah,
rebuilt that once he got there because he was
so
like,
good, yeah.
yeah. So I it's interesting to think about, especially with young quarterbacks.
Well, I just know in my career how important it was. Like I had Jordan Gross as a young player, and
Great
since
player.
to him it's his face, I owe a lot of like my success to him, like in
Hmm.
his tutelage and his ability to just like he fixed my stance for me. Like he just did all these things for me. And
Huh.
didn't have to do any of it. But he did. And I was never throwing a pick. I was playing and helping the team my first year, but he just took me under his wing and it was fantastic. And it just helped my career so much. And you need those guys to do that for you. And Najee makes a good point. I hadn't thought about it like that. And there's no team right now that I think like fits that bill, like super young that's trying to win. I mean, part of it is you're trying to win too. Now, if you're a young team growing together into winning, okay, that's fine. But Pittsburgh's always in win now mode, right? And they didn't really have any. That was interesting. They didn't have any veterans to like help him learn ball.
Huh. Did it help to have defensive guys like that? Like, was it
Well, so
helpful to
he
have
said.
like a
So he
defensive
said.
lineman for
So it's
you?
funny.
Like,
So he said. So he no, not when you're young. But he said it's interesting enough. He goes like, we had a lot of guys on defense that were veterans, but it's like they can't really help me at all. It's
huh,
like I can ask like and it's true. Like yeah, like a defensive guy. I mean, yeah, I mean, they might tell you like, oh, this works and it doesn't work, and do this, young kid. But it's a lot easier hearing it from like your own
sure.
coach, like your own like your own guy in the meeting room who you're with every day and you hang out with and whatnot. So I found that very interesting. That's just a
Yeah,
sidebar, about the Steelers. So,
that is super
um,
interesting.
yeah,
Well, one of the teams we just talked about quarterback wise was the Giants. You went on first things first with our friend Nick Wright, and you
yeah,
did a mock draft for them. You were
I
the
did.
college guy for
Yeah,
Nick and Wilds, and in that you said that the Giants would trade up to number one to get
yes,
Cam Ward, so that Tennessee would move down, and then I think the big talking point was that you had Shedeur going second to
Yeah,
Cleveland.
seems like
And
a pretty big outlier right now from
it
all of the
does,
mock
but
drafts.
I gotta be honest, man. Like I do think that's probably the order that things are going to go in, and I'm
Yeah,
curious. I'm curious what sort of made you think. Well,
yeah.
let's start with the Giants. Why do you think they're going to trade up, especially if we do think they're going to end up with Russell Wilson, right? Like
Right.
I do think that they're probably going to do that.
Probably. They need a long-term answer though. I said to Nick, I said Matt Ford says hi, and he's like, Matt, who's Matt? Matt Ford. No, I'm kidding. He didn't say that. Um, uh, no. So, okay. So here's my thought on this. Giants first. The Giants. You know who their quarterback is on the roster right now, by the way? I'm looking. If you're
Tommy
watching live,
DeVito.
I'm just watching college basketball, talking at the same time, so you have to deal with it. Um, it's Tommy DeVito.
Even we're
Okay.
watching college basketball. Yep.
That's it. That's it. That's the only quarterback on the roster right now. Tommy DeVito. I don't know if you know this, but Brian Dable and Joe Shane, the head coach and general manager, are going to be fired if they win 5 games again. Um, they need a quarterback. And right now, we just talked about it. Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers. Those are the options. Now, again, Kirk Cousins could be an option, but right now, those are the options. Those two guys are getting those guys fired. So Cam Ward from Miami might get them fired. Maybe, Matt. Probably not in year one. And he's much better as a prospect than I think Shedeur is. And they have to do something. And if you were to rank the quarterbacks, these two guys compared to last year, you would have them actually below the 6 first-round picks from last year. Like they're not those type of players. I say that because if the Giants call the Titans, who need a ton of players all over the roster, and say, "Hey, man, we'll give you some more draft picks," it's not Caleb Williams, it's not Andrew Luck, like it's not a quarterback. You're like, no chance, just no chance I'm trading that guy. So the Titans will probably open for business. The Titans can trade to 3 and still get the best player in the draft. They get Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter. They might actually, I think, Matt, and I didn't put this in the mock draft. I think it's possible that Tennessee goes from 1 to 3 to somewhere else. Like I think at 3, someone might call up for Abdul Carter. And Tennessee's like, sign me up. I'll keep moving back because I need more players. Now, two things with Tennessee. Like, again, Brian Callahan's their coach, new general manager. Brian Callahan probably has to win to save his job. Like now, he probably wants a quarterback. General manager is brand new. Is like, I'm not just build my roster, right? I don't need a quarterback right now. So there's going to be a little fight, I think, internally there, Matt, between that idea. But I think the Giants call, the Tennessee's like, yeah, sign me up. I'm in. And Giants will get Cam Ward. And then the Shedeur Sanders part of this. Shedeur, if you're ranking him as a prospect, he's probably just big board, like in the 20s.
Huh.
There's a lot to like. His accuracy at times. He's very tough. Like he got battered at Colorado, but the Colorado offense was so bad. It was just an atrocious offense, Matt. Static formations, open edges, no run game, no creativity, and Travis Hunter, who I think is incredible, believe it or not, like didn't do a lot in the offense. He like sort of lined up on one side of the field, and the wide receivers are great there. And Shedeur made some throws, but he drifts out of the pocket too much. He doesn't make the right reads at times, and he's got average arm strength. But again, tough, gritty, like all those things are true. And you got to think to yourself, if I put him in an offense that's an NFL offense with NFL offensive line, what can he be? Because again, the hardest part about all these evaluations is that these offenses are just terrible they're just bad designed. They're terribly designed. Or the other way, they're so well designed that you have to think to yourself, well, what happens if the quarterback's in a bad situation? Can he play good? So all that being said, the Browns right now have Kenny Pickett as their quarterback. And the last 2 years, they've had Deshaun Watson, Joe Flacco, Jameis Winston, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, Bailey Zappi, Jeff Driscoll, and someone else start a game for them. I mean, that's what they have right now. I don't think Shedeur is the second best player in the draft, but if you're the Browns, again, what are you going to do? You're going to roll with Kenny Pickett for a season? So that's a long way to say I think quarterbacks go 1 and 2. And I'm in the minority. I mean, I've seen Daniel Jeremiah mock draft came out this week. Mel Kiper mock draft came out this week. I mean, they got Shedeur 3, 6. There's a chance. Nick Wright has said this on the show, and I agree with him. And it's not obviously anything that's a new thought, but I think there's a really good chance that Shedeur has could have an Aaron Rodgers night where it's like he goes in top three or not till the 20s.
Hmm. It does feel like what it's going to be. I think if and I still think Tennessee, even if they're presented with a really nice offer, if you have a chance to get the best quarterback in the draft and you're a team that stinks, you should just do it. I said it last week. I'm going to stick with that. I just think that when you get that bite at the apple at 1-1, you're not going to get it again. Like even if your team is
Yeah.
terrible, it's very very rare to get that first pick, and that's more valuable than four good to great guys. Like just looking back historically, I'm kind of reminded of like the
Yeah.
Shedeur thing. Whenever you're projecting what could be, like it's like the Mitchell Trubisky disease. It's sort of like the Blake Bortles disease of like these guys that played at smaller schools, and you're like, man, like if they could just put it together, if uh, it's really hard to bet your job on that if you're a Browns
Correct.
GM. But
There's a lot of if with Shedeur.
having said that, like you kind of, I don't know, like so you kind of need to do it once in a while, and it's not every year that you're going to get 5, 6 guys that come out and are seem like very solid first round choices. Anthony Richardson, he was another where it was just like the guy has all the tools. Like I think Shedeur is a better prospect than Richardson was. I think Richardson was just one of those like Madden guys. But we'll see. I think you're right. I think he'll end up going in the top 5, just due to how important the position is. But I don't know. I like your take, and I think if I were Tennessee though, I would stick around. Um, all right, we're getting down to the end of. I'm going to be 0-1 in my first bet of March Madness, which is tradition. So maybe we can. Any last sort of topics you want to hit here before we go and enjoy our day of college basketball,
Ugh.
Jeff?
Mike, I'm on the edge of these underdogs are just so like you're like, can you make your three if you're like like I got Montana plus 10 for the first half. They're down 8 with a minute 40 left. And you're just like, I gotta get one miss from Wisconsin and like one more make. And I think I'm sort of like okay.
Hmm.
But just, it's like, oh, okay, we got a miss. Like Kim Montana. And then you look at these games and you think to yourself, there's just no way Montana look at the athletes that they're playing with against Wisconsin. Like, there's just no way this game is close, but somehow it like sort of is close. And then you look at like the High Point Purdue game. You're like there's no way this should be close, and yet somehow it's close. So
Sort of close,
um,
yeah. I don't think
it's
Creighton's missed a shot this whole day. By the way,
Creighton is
they're a good team.
what's funny is like the YouTube TV stream is way behind the
You could change that.
other. What do you mean?
There's a way you know what? I'm going to do a public service for people who are watching on YouTube TV. If you Google this, YouTube TV turn off delay, there is a broadcast delay that's a default on YouTube TV that you can turn off, uh, and it speeds you up by like 20 seconds. I don't know why it's the default that it would be the other way, but it is a very useful thing to know.
So Montana, let's see here. This big fella is gonna like get a 3-second violation. No, he missed it. Oh, got a rebound. Oh, he made it. Okay. All right, Matt. People are they're stay tuned for this. By the way, I did not announce this at the beginning. I probably should have. My dad is gonna be on the show in a few minutes. I interviewed my dad. He has a book called Raising Giants. You could go check that out on raisinggiants.com. It's about my brother and I, our youth. And then my dad's view of our careers, college career, NFL career. We talked about Judaism and just sort of growing up and sort of what it meant to be where we are. So all those things are in the book, and I'll have my dad on in a few minutes. Good conversation. So make sure to check that out. And I covered one. I got one already, Matt. We covered 2-0 today, buddy.
Let's go.
2-0 today.
Were you and Mitch like? Were you guys like? What was the aggression level like in your house? Because you're a pretty laid back guy.
So Mitch always says this, like I was so much bigger than my brother
Huh.
that he like we didn't fight. I just was so much bigger than him.
Huh. Interesting.
It's just we just
How much
couldn't do
older
it.
are you?
Yeah. 3 years.
3 years. Yeah, that's a pretty significant difference. Like if you're a senior, right, and he's like a sophomore or freshman or whatever. That could be.
Uh,
That could be.
yeah, I was much bigger than him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, shout out to your dad. Shout out to Mitch. And not shout out to Louisville, who has burned me to lead me to an 0-1 start. Very quickly, Oregon Liberty.
Yes.
Who you got?
I like Nate Biddle over 14.5 points, Oregon center. Liberty is a tiny team, one of the smallest teams in the country. Their center 6'9", Biddle 7'1", former 5-star kid. He's very, very good. He's our best player. This game, by the way, opened 4.5, Matt. Oh, 7.5 now because it's in Seattle. So it's a home-ish game for Oregon. Liberty's got to fly all the way, across the country for that game. And they're just small. And Dana Altman 8-0 now at Oregon. First round games was Oregon's head coach. It's just straight up 8-0. So
interesting.
Something to watch.
Should have maybe asked you before I picked Liberty. It's just been such a good year for the far right that I just assumed Liberty would probably take this one.
Oh, that's fantastic. Wow. Well, one day, Matt, we're going to do our political podcast, starting with asking, what are Democrats doing? But that's another topic for another day.
Yeah.
All right. Do we still have a Democratic Party? Are they still around? Do they still function?
Let's ask your dad. We will not be airing that live, but it'll appear in the audio.
Yeah,
version.
it'll be an audio only version. All right, guys, have a good weekend of watching ball. We'll be back next week, talk some football. Maybe we could do, Matt, a show earlier in the week, maybe Wednesday, and do like a Sweet 16 preview. We could throw some college basketball to folks.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm open to that.
I'm game. I got to do it on Tuesday for Bear Bets. I'll be ready to go. You're a good researcher. Just talk to Evan Abrams. He'll be ready to go.
Shout out to Evan. Great to see you, buddy. Good luck with your bets.
Take care. Thank you.
We can turn this around.
Yes. Here's the interview with my dad, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please go check out the book, Raising Giants. Again, anywhere, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kindle, paperback, wherever you go find it, check it out. And here's the interview with my dad.
Yeah, we can just do a wild one, John. If you can confirm we're off the air, we can just wild on it. Cool. I'll confirm with him that he's got that.